I didn't think we were going to start this conversation by talking about lying. I don't think anyone really knows what college is and what it's for. Like, a good portion of the population might not be literate. I witnessed the explosion and it was exhilarating. But then once I got to MIT, I felt like this is the wrong place. If you're not making, if you're just consuming, like, what are you? You're like a remora on culture. Sometimes you want to tell people what they want to hear. You got files? We'll play them. You should be fired or you should leave. Patronage, to me, was the meta.
Dark side.
But it did perpetuate my tactic of, let's call it lying.
All right. So my research dossier says that your name is C.Y. Lee. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You are from Boston, Massachusetts.
Yes.
Is that correct? All right. And it says that you would like to join Darkside. You are a person that funds projects and organizations that you believe in. Is that correct?
That's right.
All right. Let's dive into your family record really quick. It says that you have a father from Hong Kong.
That's right.
Where is your mother from?
Also Hong Kong.
Also Hong Kong. Okay, awesome. It says that your mother was a music scholar and your sister is a professional violinist.
That's correct.
Is this correct?
Yes.
So I guess take me a little bit into what it was like being raised in Boston, having parents from China, and what that experience was like.
I grew up in a town called Brookline, which was on the suburbs of Boston.
Mm-hmm.
And notable things about Brookline is it's a fairly idyllic bedroom town full of people who work in academia. And so the schools were full of like children's of nerds. And I didn't fully appreciate that till much later. But growing up in Brookline, I basically found my people early on in life, which is just people who really love to fixate on interesting stuff. And my parents were supportive, and by supportive, I mean they were really busy, so they left me and my sister alone. Standard Gen X latchkey kid upbringing, which is really great because without supervision, you can get a lot of creative stuff done.
Interesting. So was there any aspect of your parents giving you that level of freedom that you felt like worked against your development at a young age?
I wouldn't say so. There's a trope for children of immigrants where parents saddle their kids with expectation.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it was because I was wired the way I was or because they were too busy to apply tiger parenting that I think it worked out great.
It says here that you yourself learned piano and cello and you entered an orchestra. Was that something that you feel was imposed on you by your parents and the upbringing, or was that something that you feel like
I would call it there's a tradition of classical instruments amongst Chinese of a certain era. And so every kid is sort of expected to take up the piano and then maybe a stringed instrument or some other instrument later on and to master it. And I think it is symbolic of rigor, of a sense of what excellence means, and also keeps them busy. So I kind of went down that track, and because I was reasonably talented and because, everybody else was doing it, it felt like this is fine. And I would say that I didn't rebel against it, but I did start lying about how much I was practicing.
Why was it that you had to lie about how much you were practicing?
Well, it's an authority issue where there is a third party who is responsible for tracking how well you're doing at something. I didn't think we were going to start this conversation by talking about lying. But sometimes you want to tell people what they want to hear. And when they hear the right thing, that message goes upstream. And you end up with something where the results might be the same, but you're essentially articulating the story you think other people want to hear.
And do you think that you were doing that also because you wanted to make your family proud and live up to the tradition? Or was it more so just a way to
that would be
get
a
out of the
really strategic way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
But I think it was more a matter of convenience. And, there's also this aspect of like, you want people to be happy with how things are going. And if it doesn't seem like it would be negative to stretch the truth, why not?
Yeah. So during this process, I guess, what were things that you actually were passionate about or developing a passion for in the midst of lying to your parents about, being a virtuoso musician?
Well, it was more about practicing. I think there was this aspect, this illusion that I was a virtuoso, which I convinced, and apparently enough people around me that they would let me into elite orchestras. But I was spending a lot of time watching TV, in particular the local music video channel, which was, of course, this is like back in the 80s. So there was a limited vocabulary of music videos. So I was obsessed by how a performer could do everything in the video live in one take, which was my impression. I didn't know much about editing at the time. And so that fascinated me. And the other thing I was doing a lot of was spending time with my computer. And so I was programming. I was playing with a lot of basic programming, a little bit of assembly. I was obsessed.
Where did that obsession come from?
Playing with Legos.
Okay.
So Legos, I think, are the earliest object where I think a kid can feel like they're manifesting their imagination. And that's the beautiful thing about software. It's like Legos, except you don't run out. You have constraints. Like there's the size of the table if you're building with Legos of like how big a thing you can build. But more often than not, when you're working with Legos, you run out of pieces. And with software, it's really hard to run out of pieces. So as a creative landscape, software is magical.
Yeah. Was there a moment when it became clear to your parents or to your family that you were prioritizing a focus in tech versus a focus in music?
I don't think it was tension. I think my parents are probably secretly happy about it. Now that I have kids, when I see them running on their own drive towards a passion that has sort of generative properties, you want to pour fuel on that fire.
Yeah.
So I did both. School was easy, and so it wasn't hard to maintain a balance.
It says here that you studied at MIT. Is that correct?
That's right.
What was the process like, I guess, developing your love for tech and, I guess, developing your skills up to the point where you felt confident enough to be able to pursue a career in technology?
I feel like I had a pretty early instinct to want a career in technology. In 8th grade, me and 4 friends founded a software company. We're essentially LARPing it. But at the time, it seemed really real because starting a software company meant you made a program, put it on diskettes, and then sold it to whoever you could find who'd want to buy that program. It was very much a, Ziplocs full of instructions and a floppy disk.
It's almost like making an album and like
it is. It's
burning it to CDs and selling it.
Really, like going out on the street or having a trunk full of mixtapes.
Yeah.
I didn't see the parallel back then, but we had our dreams. We were making software, and we were just thinking about the logistics of distribution. And of course, we never really got to the distribution part. Your parents will only let you do so much after you've made software to like go out and hawk it on the street. But that instinct to make something that was useful both to us and to other people came on pretty early. And when I say useful, I mean games. Because what else do you know when you're, 12 or 13 years old? But that led me down the track of thinking, like, I want to do this for a living. Yeah. And the obvious place to go for that was sort of the neighborhood college, which was MIT. It was what felt like a logical progression. But then once I got to MIT, I felt like this is the wrong place. And the reason why is MIT is a research university. So a lot of how they approach a lot of disciplines is from a very abstract perspective. And for me, that was frustrating because I wanted to make. I still wanted to play with Legos. And so that led me to switch to architecture, which of course feels a lot more like Legos, just bigger. But it, I think, informed how I think about humans and structures and being empathetic about what people need so you can build the thing that works for them. And that ultimately is what makes software interesting, is if you take those things into account, you can make cool things for yourself and for other people.
Yeah. I think it's really unique because especially with the technological advancements that we have today, we look at kids that get into tech and are building crazy stuff or vibe coding. We're like, okay, that's kind of par for the course now with everything that is available. But we don't think about, what decade was it when you were 8 years old?
That would be the 70s.
Right. Which is like crazy to think about 8 to 12-year-olds building software at that age, at that time, based on what our impression is of what was available from a technological aspect. So I think that's a big, that says a lot about who you were as a believer and a dreamer and how passionate you were for tech in general. And it's also just crazy to think about how Legos is kind of
everything is Lego.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you as a child pick up Legos and that's what you want to fuck with, I think that speaks to the instinct. I don't know if it's an 80-20 or 90-10 rule of like with any medium. Let's say it's probably 95%. 95% of the people in that medium are entertained by it. They're enjoying it passively, and 5% are making stuff. And if you're building with Legos and not like just trying to make what the kit says you should make, you're making stuff.
Yeah.
So that instinct, I think it's crosses generations. I was born into a world with Apple IIs and basic programming. I was born at the right time for that. I mean, the 12-year-old today who's born into, prompting an AI to do their bidding, I mean, I'm jealous.
Yeah.
But at the same time, this is an ongoing thing. Like the rate of technological change, the medium you're born into is your reality. So yeah, I think everyone still starts with Legos. God bless them. That company is epic. But from there, once you realize you can manifest what's in your imagination and you can articulate, you can sculpt with it.
Yes.
You just take what's around you and you take that energy and you do that shit.
Absolutely. I would love to get into a lot of the things that you did manifest with your skills, but it says here that you got into college radio and DJing during your time at MIT. So I'm curious as to how that came about. Would you say that that's an extension of you being a musician early on in life? And also, what is the story of you actually getting into college radio and DJ?
Yeah, I would say it started with listening to the radio. And I didn't really start listening to the radio until I was probably in 6th or 7th grade. Prior to that, my entire exposure to music was classical music. That's just what was played in the household because my parents both were practicing, and that was the records that we had. Once I started listening to radio, I got fascinated by just the music itself. And I didn't know enough about music to deconstruct it, but I knew what it did in terms of like making me feel good about what I was listening to, how it touched my mood. And it made me aspire to make that kind of music. And so the interesting thing about having a classical education and listening to the stuff you want to make is there is no bridge. Or it definitely wasn't a bridge back then. And we can come back to that later because there is this interesting dichotomy between the performing arts and the creative arts and how there's this artificial barrier between them. But all that to say, I feel like being fascinated with music, when I saw people manipulating music with the turntable and the physical relationship between what was coming out of the speaker and where the needle was and how you're controlling the rotation of the record, that was like the coolest instrument I'd ever seen. And so I joined the radio station because I wanted to learn how to scratch. And that's where the equipment was. And, and through that process, like you couldn't just join the radio station and get a show. There was a bit of an initiation process. So I learned a lot of like what feel now like these ancient techniques of like working with reel-to-reel tape, taking a razor blade to do edits. It's like stuff like that where it's a very tactile way of working with music. I think ultimately kind of like coded my mind in a certain way where I have a connection with music that has this engineering angle with it because it's waves and it's physical things that articulate these waves that then bring them to ears. And then there's like the culture you build on top of that. I feel like that upbringing combined with, my experience at the radio station, combined with just meeting artists over time, has really kind of reinforced my sense of how important music is to the cultural infrastructure we all live in.
I'm curious because MIT, I didn't go to college. Let's just start there. So I have an idea of how challenging college can be. But that's just even a standard college where a place like MIT, you obviously have to be one of the most adept students, but also I'm sure it can be extremely challenging basically what they offer. What would you say was the most challenging aspect of going to MIT, and did you feel any sense of pressure to succeed?
That's a really good question. I think college is, like right now and even back then, I don't think anyone really knows what college is and what it's for. It is a perpetuating system where you have, especially for research university, you have professors who are doing amazing research, and they have a team of grad students that work for them. And then you have a bunch of undergrads that roll in, and the professors are obligated to teach them something. There's a curriculum, there's lesson plans, and they tend to repeat year over year over year. And so you enter a system, much like high school is a system, college is a system. It doesn't matter whether it's MIT or Harvard or State College or whatever. There's a structure, and it has very deep state vibes to it. So when you enter the structure, the obvious thing to do is you take the classes, you fulfill the requirements, you get towards the degree. It's like checking off boxes. In many ways, it's like an MMO. You can see it as an MMORPG.
Which is what?
Massively multiplayer role-playing game. And I found that frustrating because my impression of what I thought it could be was not what it actually was. So I did the standard thing that most freshmen do, which is you don't show up at a couple of lectures. You spend a lot of time hanging out with friends. You start hanging out at the radio station. You do things that are interesting to you, but which are not actually the programmed academic experience. And I don't think I was ever frustrated with it specifically, or it challenged me, but it did perpetuate my tactic of, let's call it lying, which is I would copy problem sets. I would do things basically just to get through the requirements, which I found like these are not serving me. These are not fitting my interests. So I think the real thing I learned out of MIT was that sometimes your goals are not aligned with what might seem like the right structures to get you where you want to go. And when you end up in those situations, it's in your power to find alternative paths. And that's what I did. I switched majors. I found advisors later on where I discovered there are ways to double count credits so you can graduate. I figured out stuff about alignment.
Tell me more about that. Double counting credits.
I ended up graduating with 2 degrees. One was architecture and one was computer science.
Yeah.
And I think what I learned out of going through that system was that everything is negotiable, which is it's in everyone's interest, both the institution and the student, to have them graduate with the degree. And so advisors and different people, sometimes it depends on the department, but people have the power to let you slide by requirements. Because the requirements at some level they're guides. They don't have to be rules. And when you find the right people to discuss your goals and the rules that may or may not make sense with respect to those goals, you can sometimes get what you want through discussion, negotiation. Because it's like at the end of the day, everyone's aligned. We want you out of here with these degrees because we think you're qualified to represent the university as having,
yes,
not just taking the course of study, but it's like you're a smart person who's likely to contribute to the endowment later on. And there's conversations you're going to have with that when you understand what objectives and alignments can be.
Yeah. Well, I can understand how it is in everybody's best interest for essentially everyone to graduate with a degree, especially if they can represent the university to the best of their ability in the workforce.
Yeah.
But obviously that isn't always afforded to everybody. And I think, like you said, a lot of the requirements are really kind of just a filtration system to make sure that people are doing what they need to do to not embarrass themselves and or the university when they do actually leave. So in order for you to accomplish those things, were you just persuasive enough? Because obviously you had the awareness, but do you feel like you were persuasive enough to get that result? Or do you think that it was a matter of your academic achievement or how much they believed in you? Or would you say it was a combination of both?
I think that the high level factor was that they believed me and they believed in me. And at the end of the day, I think that's what you're dealing with in any system is, who believes in you and how do they believe in you and how much of their neck are they willing to stick out for you?
Would you say that concept of everything being negotiable is something that applies to every aspect of life?
I mean, any structure put together by people that has been perpetuated beyond the level of interest that the founder still has in the thing, I feel like that is negotiable. I mean, there's basic principles of being a good human amongst other humans that is not negotiable. But when you're dealing with structures that people put together, I think to the degree that your alignment with that structure is 100, everything's negotiable. But if it's not aligned, it's one of those things where you should be fired or you should leave.
Wow. It seems like you cracked the code. You cracked the code of life, the systems.
I don't know if it's cracking the code. It's understanding that people build structures because they need to. Sometimes it's for efficiency. Sometimes it's because someone's figured out some best practices. But the people who put them together, they're not always going to be right. And the system isn't always going to be the same. Like the environment might change. The people who come into the system might change. Technology changes. And the rules you put together a year or 2 or 10 ago may not apply. And if it's no one's job to update the rules or to zoom out and see what the best way to structure the rules in order to keep the themes that the organization believes in to be solid, then they should be questioned.
So attending a school like MIT, and sorry to keep harping on this because I feel like this is interesting. What is your relationship with proximity to excellence? Meaning, for a lot of people, let's just take students. If they go to a school like MIT or any other, Ivy League school or, well-known school, there might be other students in their class that excel. When you were around students like that, did it make you want to achieve more? Did it make you feel smaller? What was the effect that being around other deeply talented people have on you in that situation?
It's inspiring. It's inspiring because you have an understanding of what's possible around you, like living testimony to what people can do when they have passion or if they're dedicated to something or whatnot. And I think it applies to athletics. It applies to any sort of domain where people can really invest their time and talent in being really good at something. I do feel like it can be intimidating, but if one's instinct is to not compare themselves to others, then it's more of a really great context to realize what's possible.
Coming out of MIT, basically willing your way out of there, what was the first thing that you did?
First job was at Microsoft. And so I left and basically drove to the other end of I-90 to start at a group that was originally going to be something else, but then ended up turning into Outlook. So Microsoft Outlook was for a while what they called a personal information manager, which is like stuff your Palm Pilot would do. and it turned into a phenomenon.
Wow. I mean, Microsoft Outlook obviously is one of the biggest and greatest programs to ever exist.
It has a surprisingly long life cycle.
Yeah. I mean, it's still alive today.
Yeah,
for sure.
I'm frankly shocked. But I mean, I love that for Microsoft.
What does it feel like to be a part of something that, I guess for lack of better words, is that iconic or that useful to so many people around the globe?
Yeah, what is amusing to me about it is that it was not intentional, but it felt really good getting there. And I think it's also a product of being lucky in a lot of ways. I don't doubt that I had an instrumental part in it becoming the thing it was. I don't know what part I have in its ultimate success. A lot of it's marketing. A lot of it is people getting stuff to happen where I'm just doing a relatively small part of it. But it does feel good to be part of something that still has relevance in the world. Gosh, it's like 30 years after it was created.
Yeah.
And with the tech product, that's insane.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good, I mean, honestly, email, generally speaking, has lasted pretty long.
Yeah. The thing about email is email will be forever.
Yeah.
I'm pretty confident in that.
That's amazing. So was there a stint at Apple?
There was. I was an intern at Apple.
Okay. That was before Microsoft.
That was before Microsoft.
Got you. Okay. All right. You sneakily left that out a little bit, but all right, cool.
Yeah.
So intern at Apple, then went to Microsoft. It says here that you were later at RealNetworks.
That's right.
During the Napster era.
That's
a big era, considering everything that took place.
I witnessed the explosion and it was exhilarating.
Yeah.
I knew nothing about how the music industry worked. So for a while, it seemed like, what are all these people whining about? Because the way I experienced Napster was coming from a world where if you wanted to hear something, you had to buy it and break the seal. And that was the first time you'd be able to experience it. Unless you had a friend who'd let you in on it earlier. But the world of culture, when you have to buy something in order to hear it, honestly really sucks. This culture moves slowly. People don't know what you're talking about if you get obsessed about something that they don't have. There is no unifying layer of memes, really. Once Napster kind of broke open that wall and you could look into other people's drives and see what music they'd collected, that felt like an enormous eye-opening moment for everybody at the same time. And so it's like the cultural landscape then flattened out. Like you could hear anything you felt like you could search for. And I think it's hard to appreciate if you grow up in a world where that's your reality from the time that you start getting interested in media. But bridging that gap, it's almost like the world where I've never experienced, where it used to be if you wanted to hear music, you'd have to go find the people who had instruments to play it. There was no in a world before pre-recorded music. Yeah. And so I'm like, yeah, that's cool. But to experience that unlock was dramatic.
Yeah. To kind of jump ahead, what has it been like for you to see that era, basically, of if you wanted music, you had to go find people that played music live.
Yeah.
To go into the recorded music era,
right.
To then go into the heavily distributed music era, but still physical if you wanted to listen to music, to then go into digital, but not highly accessible, to now music is everywhere.
Yeah, there's too much music to listen to.
There's 10,000 songs uploaded a day to Spotify. Right.
Yeah. I think it's amazing. I think it's amazing for people who like music and appreciate music and what it can do for them to have that much at their disposal. I feel like people who grew up in a different world where that music was valued for scarcity I can see why it's upsetting. But in the abstract, I feel like never before has it been so possible for people to create something. And I'm, again, talking about the 5% of people who actually create stuff, to find an audience for it who then form a connection around that thing.
as a musician or former musician, as a DJ or former DJ, do you look at the way music is being distributed now as a benefit or as a benefit to artists or something that hurts artists?
It depends what they're trying to get out of their artistry. Yeah. If they're just trying to find human connection, it's never been better. If they're trying to make it their identity as a person whose career is defined by their art and they have to make money from that to define their career, it's terrible. And, you know, I can't really speak to it because I haven't personally felt that roller coaster ride of having something and then losing that something because of forces that are not under my control. And I definitely feel the upsettedness that a lot of people have around that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think it's I feel very optimistic about how people's creativity can be manifested into a form where it can be ready to share with other people in a way where those other people can reflect back and vibe on it and connect on it in a way that wasn't possible before. So if you think about things like books, there was a period of time when literacy was not something that you could take for granted. Like a good portion of the population might not be literate. And you could say, what if the whole population was literate? What if people could write anything? Like, would that destroy the value of people who are writing, you know, works, great works or not? And the fact of the matter is, like, yeah, if there was a time when like scribes were really, really important people because they could record things and then read them back later, that was a world where there wasn't a critical mass of people who were going to be writing stories to each other and sharing stories across generations because you could actually write them down and people after you died could still read it. I think we're in a stage now where, you know, people who have an idea of what something they want to create can create something that ultimately feels like it's what they imagined and share it with people who can reflect back. Maybe they riff on it, maybe they just talk about it, maybe they just think it's really amazing. But that connection is ultimately what we're all looking for. And if you are purely a consumer of content and not creating your own content, then you're not really contributing to the body of work that draws people together.
That's powerful.
This is old news, though, right?
No, like, it is for sure.
Like, if you're not making, if you're just consuming, like, yeah. What are you? You're like a remora on culture. If you're not adding to the culture in some way, at least showing up, having conversations, like, you're a bystander. Yeah. And maybe, like, you know, it's a world of paucity where just like surviving is the most you can do. But like, I think we live in a world where people should find their generative selves and share that with people around them and find connection with other people. Like,
yeah. And I think, you know, even people that are not actively a part of the process of creating and contributing are still becoming more aware holistically of what it takes and what goes into it. And I think you know, we'll get into that conversation, but there is a shift towards there being more appreciation for those things. And, you know, I think it'll be little by little, but there will be a transition to more and more people wanting to find ways to attribute more value to the result of, you know, the artists that are going in and creating and putting everything out there.
Yeah. I feel like, well, let's dive into that a bit now. Like, I feel like what is more accessible than ever before is understanding the process behind making something amazing. And part of understanding a process is seeing someone else doing the process. And part of it is you yourself trying some version of that process. So, you know, during the NFT era, when artists were buying each other's work, I think a lot of that was not just like artists wanting to support other artists, but artists fundamentally know what it takes to make great art. And so it's one of those, you know, like knows like, right? Game knows game. And so if you know something is really spectacular because you've tried to make things to that level before, I think that what we paid each other for in the NFT era was both, you know, like the possibility that thing might rise in value. But I think when artists buy other artists' work, it's really appreciation for the value in its making that resulted in the final thing. Like we all know from that era, people bought a lot of NFTs, and I'm pretty sure a lot of those NFTs never got played more than once. And to me, I think initially that felt a little sad or maybe even offensive. But ultimately, I think it's that those collects, that putting that kind of money into getting a receipt on the blockchain was about expressing a combination of gratitude and respect for the fact that this thing came into existence. And that process that made it happen was where the value would lie for when artists bought other artists' work.
Yeah. Well, I would love to get into that. As you know, I obviously was a big part of that NFT era, especially on the music side. But I want to talk about how you ended up getting there. So in 2013, I believe, you started a company called MusicNerd.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about what MusicNerd is? What it was, why you started it, and what it is now?
Okay, so this hopefully won't be too long and drawn out a story, but I'll start it from when I worked at RealNetworks, which is when it became obvious that Napster was the greatest thing on earth for being able to listen to anything you wanted and to understand sort of the musical landscape in a way that you'd never been able to before. Me and the person who sat in the cube next to me, his name's Carl, got really excited about what new ways to listen would come to pass. And this pile of ideas, I think, accumulated over the next 15 years. And it became clear over time that those things, a lot of which I thought of as what are the user interfaces around music, they sort of terminated at iTunes. iTunes was pretty much like what everyone was using to listen to digital music. And for a brief period of time, iTunes was amazing. I think it was like iTunes 4. But after that, it was all downhill. It became like Office for music. And it was just not fun. And it wouldn't help you do things like expand your understanding around an artist's work. It wouldn't help you like understand backstories and see connections. It was just like, you got files, we'll play them. And so that frustration of lack of development led Carl and I to decide, you know what, if no one's going to do it, we're going to go for it. We're going to try to write the software we want to see to make the most of this world where music is digital and distribution is free. And so we started experimenting with just apps on the iPhone. And we made probably 3 or 4 different apps. A lot of them revolved around how do we get it so that when you're listening to music, we can feed you the things that the artist wants you to know about them. So we were like back when Instagram had an API that everyone could access, and Twitter and YouTube, we were basically pulling in information while you're listening to music to basically put it at your fingertips to explore. And that was a huge unlock for us in terms of, when you're in the days where you listen to music primarily on a desktop, there was this pattern of listening that music nerds would have where you just started opening tabs because you started thinking, you had questions. So you'd open tabs, you start Googling, you started looking for things on YouTube, you started looking for the artist's social media. And our thesis was, let's just get that onto your phone and do that before you even need to think about it. And over time, we were trying to craft stories out of those individual tweets and Instagram posts to get them into an experience while you're listening where you'd get to know who is the artist, what are they about, and hopefully get the listener to care. So one way to think about it is we were trying to make the music player app into sort of like Flavor Flav for that artist. We're just like hyping up that artist, or like what you should know, why you should care, and just get excited. And we made something, I think, that was pretty amazing, but we quickly realized upon getting to this point of like, we should get this out, is that we couldn't actually get it out because to do that, we would have to sign agreements with every company whose API we were using. And we weren't totally naive about this. Like, we kind of knew this would come to pass, but it became painfully clear, especially as this sort of music tech venture capital era, which I would say is around from 2016 to 2018 or 19. There was a lot of money flowing into apps. And we thought, we'll just make a great app and we'll flip it. But that in and of itself, it is a business plan, but it's incredibly naive. And we came to realize like there's nobody we can flip this to. So in 2020, we sort of started parking the software and thinking about the problem less about a problem we can solve by making software, but it's a problem that needs to be solved by changing culture. And so that's kind of a mindfuck, because if you only know how to make software and you don't know what the levers of culture are, it's an uphill battle to even figure out what you have to learn. Fortunately, this is about the same time that NFTs were coming into view, and Carl was super obsessed with NFTs that were anime based, so visual NFTs. And this was probably early 2020 when music NFTs started popping off. He pulled me in, and I feel like I witnessed firsthand the building of a culture from scratch. And that's been really informative to how I think about what parts of reality you can bend in service of making a culture that has the values you care about.
When you talk about that culture, how would you describe it?
I think the foundation of that culture was artists who were enthusiastic about presenting their work to other people and wanting to find not just, and they had been doing this before. These are all artists who had been posting on Twitter or Instagram prior. And if you zoom out, the reason why they do that is they want to find an audience, and they want to find an audience that appreciates the art. Like adding a layer of capital on top of that, where the appreciation can be expressed through collecting. That culture wasn't obvious until NFTs got easy enough to use, until marketplaces became available. And then you could start seeing where people are trying to mimic existing patterns of how people interact with art to kind of build that NFT culture that we ended up all participating in. So realizing there's things like, little communities that have to form, little cliques that have to form, the work being visible, the process being visible, people struggling, crises happening. These are all parts of what create the lore that end up being the foundation for the culture. And even thinking back to what like Bitcoin is in some sense its own culture, because people had to believe in Bitcoin in order to create their own stories around Bitcoin that sit on top of the lore of Bitcoin. And the more people who believe, the more that becomes reality. And in some sense, that's how culture forms. The challenge with Bitcoin is just a thing. It's like being excited about money. Great. But if the currency is art, like people are making art, they're trading art, then you have this, it's like layers and layers of artifacts that represent where people are at and what people are doing with the tools at hand and the resources at hand at any particular time.
Mm-hmm. For those that don't know, CY is one of the top collectors in the music NFT space. While you were collecting in the music NFT space, obviously we knew it was a bubble, but I think a lot of people didn't ever think the bubble was going to pop. I think most people thought it was going to be something that was going to evolve and transform into something else entirely.
Yeah.
And I think what ultimately did happen was that the bubble popped. Right. And a majority of people that were collecting or creating and releasing in the Web3 space pretty much just backed away from it and kind of went back to regular life.
Yeah.
I think the one example of evolution coming out of that has been what you've been doing with funding.
Yeah.
In executive producing projects and artists that you believe in. Could you dive into what inspired you to want to make the jump from simply just collecting to becoming an executive producer on other artists' projects, and I guess what the difference is between the two things?
Yeah. So I was one of many collectors, I think, who were collecting for reasons where they came to appreciate and wanted to support the artists that they were collecting from, and less out of speculation. And to touch on like the people who left after the bubble popped, I like to think of it as, oh, that's cute. It's your first bubble. Anybody who's been in tech and media and culture for long enough knows that there's been just a constant stream of bubbles that have gone from the era of silicon to software to internet. It just happens over and over again as part of a growth cycle. It's almost like the adolescence of a culture is where people get too excited about it, overinvest, and then are disappointed, and then everyone leaves the room. But when they leave the room, there's still building blocks that are left behind. And the building blocks that were left behind after the pop, I saw was like, there's the sentiment of caring about the art and the artists and wanting to support that. And in some sense, that sentiment has always existed in every layer of culture that has preceded us back to religious times when churches would be patrons for artists that they wanted to build the art inside the cathedrals or the churches. Patronage, to me, was the meta, which is people of means who see people making really interesting or great work want to support those people so that they can keep doing that work. And when one understands culture as, in a physical world, culture is made of the artifacts around you. And those things help ground you in a world where anything is possible. And so if you want to keep control of your foundation, you want the people around you whose aesthetic and decisions and values you like to make things that become your environment. So whether that environment is your media landscape or your technological landscape, it comes down to what I like to think about it as: if you as an individual don't like where something is going, you can be cheap about it and just complain. Or if you have the means, you should take that capital and make the things that you think should be part of where you want to be going. And this is an eternal truth, right? It's cheap to complain. Anyone can complain. But if you want change, especially if you appreciate culture as the artifacts around you that kind of form your foundation of who you are and who we are collectively, then put your money into the people you believe in to make those things.
For sure. When you go into executive producing a project or becoming a patron of an artist, what are the expectations that you have? Are you expecting a percentage of sales? Are you looking for attribution? What is it that you get out of being a part of a project like that?
I think there's many reasons why someone would do that. Like, I think there's the tropes of the past where I think there's expectations that actually may be realistic in some cases, but in many cases aren't. And there's sort of like, I think, new logic that I've found myself believing in where I can make decisions easily about wanting to be a patron of a project. A lot of it comes down to belief in the artist, belief in the values that artist represents, a belief in their ability to execute. And a lot of it's just vibes, honestly.
Do people look at you like you are crazy for trying to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish?
I think what I'm trying to do is meme a culture of patronage into existence by doing it, using it, basically being my own guinea pig. And finding out what are the pitfalls, what are the rewards, and articulating rails where it's going to feel right for most people who try it. So I like to use the concept of a concert t-shirt as an analogy. At some point, live shows did not have concert t-shirts as part of the culture. Somebody had to come up with the idea, and someone had to print something up, and someone had to go home with it the next day, and the next day someone had to ask them, hey, so you were at that concert. That somehow expanded into this world where any fan who shows up at a show knows that if they really want to give that artist, some sort of financial props, in addition to rep that artist on the street, you buy the t-shirt. Like, there's a merch table, there's going to be a t-shirt, you're going to pay $50 for it or whatever, and everyone's going to leave happy. It's different with patronage because the transaction keeps going. And that it means that there's got to be elements of hospitality. There's got to be elements of communication. There's got to be elements of like, is this thing still happening? If things go wrong, how are we going to keep going forward without creating bad feelings? Like, the great thing about merch, physical merch, is once the money has changed hands for the merch, the transaction ends. Yes, maybe the t-shirt's bad quality. Maybe the record shows up warped. But those are things that can be easily remedied. It's much more challenging in an executive producing relationship to talk about where things are, because sometimes you don't know where things are going. There may be a project that has a specific shape to it, but sometimes opportunities come along. Sometimes things go wrong. And somehow both parties have to be okay with it at the outcome when they step away at the end.
So, in a nutshell, you are trying to find more people like yourself that would be interested in patronage and coming on and funding projects that they believe in as a contribution to culture. So, I guess my last question is, if I were a patron, or sorry, if I was someone like yourself and I wasn't already into patronage and you wanted to pitch me on doing it, what is beyond, because I think you've already given me a sense of the cultural contribution aspect of it, but from a very practical sense, what is something that you feel like would perk my ears up and make me want to join you on your journey?
It's challenging right now because it is such a foreign concept and there's not a lot of examples. I think the easiest way it could happen is where an artist has an existing patron, and that patron is someone that I could introduce that person to ask that patron, like, why are you a patron of this project? What does it mean to you? Because nothing works like testimony from someone that you recognize as maybe a version of yourself. In the abstract, I think it comes down to, like, if you want to see culture made, understand that there's a process to making culture and understand that that needs funding. And when you find an artist who's doing the thing that you want to see more of in the world, that's the conversation to ask, or the conversation to start is, I see what you're doing. What else are you working on? How can I help?
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time today. Everything that you have talked about seems like something that we could find very valuable here. So I appreciate you spending the time, being vulnerable, sharing your story and the things that you are trying to accomplish. So we will be reviewing your Dark Side application.
Thank you.
And we will be in touch soon.